Welcome, critters. I'm Claire Jones, your devoted host of the Sacred Reading CR podcast, where we discuss and examine Critical Role episodes, plotlines, characters, and players through the lens of sacred reading practices. This particular episode is at Campaign 1, Episode 34, Part 1, and joining me today is Atlas.
Hey,
We are two tired girlies, but
very much so.
we are here trying to rock it. All right, so the icebreaker for today is, what is your very first memory?
My very first memory is of an apple picking farm, quote unquote, at like a state fair where the apples were red foam balls stuck in plywood trees.
Ah!
And they must have been like 2 feet tall, but it's the only thing I remember about it is picking apples out of a tree and the apples were balls.
That is adorable. I mean, I'm sure it was set up as a kid's activity, I would assume.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How old do you think you were? Did you?
Probably 3. Yeah.
Yeah, mine is around the age of 2. My parents moved houses when I was 2.
Mm. Okay.
And I remember the first night that we had in the new house, as one does when you move into a new house, we didn't have any furniture at that point in time.
Hmm.
Still waiting for the movers to arrive with all of our furniture. And so we ordered pizza for dinner, as one does for new house moving. And I remember getting an absolute kick out of eating pizza in the middle of the dining room floor with like basically a cooler as our table.
As kids, that's what adventures are made of.
I know, I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. And yeah, core childhood memory right there.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Oh, childhood. Mm. All right, well, please join us as we embark on this exciting adventure in story analysis and self-reflection in order to deepen our understanding of ourselves and the world around us. As always, we love hearing your own insights and stories as well, so please comment, like, subscribe below, and ready? All right, let's dive in. Vox Machina is currently in the process of making their way to the underground project underneath Castle Whitestone in an attempt to stop Lord and Lady Briarwood, the two individuals responsible for the death of Percy's family and the corruption of his home city. They are taking a short rest in the crypt after dealing with some wraiths, preparing to advance farther.
Pick one.
Scanlan's seeming spell is still in effect, making the party members who are men leaning, masculine leaning. Oh God, this is already off track, including Trinket, look like Percy, and the women look like Cassandra in hopes of confusing any enemies they encounter. Grog takes a vial of holy oil out of his bag of holding and keeps it on his person. Healing potions are also distributed among the party. They strategize, with Scanlan suggesting that Vex, under the guise of Cassandra, surprise the Briarwoods with one of her special arrows, either exploding or doused in holy oil. Percy suggests that Vax scout ahead while chiding him about his willingness to rush into danger. Kind of contradictory messaging there, but okay. Before their rest is over, Grog attunes to the boots of levitation that they found. They argue some more about whether they should take a long rest, but Scanlan reminds them that there is an active rebellion still going on outside. And Percy asks his sister Cassandra which of the Briarwoods she would consider more of a threat. She says they're both dangerous for different reasons. Silas is dangerous because of his unnatural nature, and he has some sort of power over the mind. The blade he carries is also as dark as he is. But Delilah, on the other hand, carries powerful magic with the ability to create and rule undead creatures. Together, they have an affiliation to this whispered one that they have been talking of, and they are driven by one thing, which is their affection for each other. The party begins plotting ways to separate the Briarwoods with Cassandra's information, floating the idea that they could try to lure them outside, where Silas may be at a disadvantage because of the sun. Scanlan also suggests that they abandon this and take their evidence back to Amon, but Percy says he can't leave until this is taken care of. Vax also lets Cassandra know that they are wary of her and her assistants. She understands their caution and explains that she was taken to the Temple of Pelor after Percy escaped 5 years prior and recovered there slowly. She helped with Whitestone's first attempt at rebellion against the Briarwoods, which resulted in failure and her capture by the Briarwoods. While under their control, she made attempts to help the remaining rebels and feed them information. And Vex rolls insight into Cassandra to see that there is conviction behind her words. They continue on and enter the cavern as the Sarenrae crest sewn into Vax's glove activates, flashing and glowing in the dark. So Pike's avatar manifests before them once again to the collective joy of the party. They introduce Pike to Cassandra and carry on down the tunnel. The group comes to a fork in the tunnel, and the twins argue briefly before Vex finds footprints on the ground leading to the left. She smells a sharp chemical odor the other way and determines that the Briarwoods must have their acid pits down to that side. Continuing to the left, Vax finds some magical blast traps and instructs the party to go around them. While attempting to escort Trinket around one, the bear slips and steps on the trap, exploding and activating a gas cloud, which affects both him and Grog. Fortunately, the lingering effects of Keyleth's Heroes Feast have remained, so they are immune to poisons. A bit further down, they find a bronze door that, after checking it for traps, Vax manages to open for the rest of the party. It reveals a bronze room and a white stone ceiling with evidence that building materials have been carried through the hallway. Cassandra says that this is as far as she's come before and assumes that the project the Briarwoods have been working on is on the other side. Keyleth attempts to figure out what sort of natural attributes this room may have, but only finds that the metal used here is a very good conductor, and it is not native to Taldore, the continent that they are on, so it is likely imported from distant lands. Vax, upon further inspection, notices an unusual button-looking object embedded in the center of the room, and the group agrees to have Vex shoot it from outside the room to find out what it activates, but there is no reaction when she does so. Percy then tries sliding his sword on the floor to attempt to cause a short if the surface is conducting electricity. Nothing happens, but as he moves closer, he is now able to see that the object in the floor is some type of opal gem or stone. Vax decides to skirt around the room to make it to the door on the other side. While he does this, he notices that there are 3 more opals embedded in the wall at shoulder height on the side. Crouching underneath them, he makes it to the other door, checks the door for traps, but finds nothing. He notes, however, that there is no handle or obvious way to open it. The other members of the group notice that there are an additional 3 opals on the other side of the room to mirror the exact same positions as the other 3. Vax attempts to push open the door but fails. He then calls for Grog to sneak along the wall under the opals and join him, but Grog, being Grog, chooses to ignore this and walks straight through the center of the room to the other side, seemingly without consequence. With a laugh, he reaches Vax and uses a pickaxe as leverage under the door to pry it open, but the handle of the pickaxe shatters. And Scanlan, fed up with the doors besting the team, as always, walks up to the opal on the floor and presses it. It doesn't move, but he does notice a small white light emit for a moment before going out. Each member of the group then goes to a different opal, pressing their hands against them, but nothing happens. Scanlan suggests that it might be because Pike is non-corporeal, but her opal is, in fact, lighting up as well when she pushes it. Vex then checks the room to see if they are missing an opal, but it is Cassandra who finds a secret button underneath the foot of the door on the other side of the room. When she presses it, there is a sound of stone shifting loudly, and 2 large walls of green residuum glass slam down to trap all 7 members of Vox Machina within the center of the bronze room. Grog attempts to smash the glass, but leaves only a scratch on it. Keyleth uses Thunderwave, but it has no effect as Vax pours some poison on his dagger. Vex dips 3 arrows in holy oil. Behind Cassandra, the bronze door on the other side of the room opens, and out step Lord and Lady Briarwood. Silas greets the group, and as he does, Vax notices a placard on the wall behind the door where the Briarwoods came from. So he uses his Cape of the Mountebank mountebank, whatever, around himself, he uses Dimension Door to jump to it and press it. There is the sound of stone grating once again, but the glass walls do not move. Instead, two large bronze tubes push into the room. Lord Briarwood says, well, I was not expecting you to want to see your friends dissolved so quickly, but certainly, why not? The rest of the group look up to see green liquid pour into the room from the tubes, and instantly Percy draws out his gun, trying to clog the tubes with ice. He manages to block one, but while he is reloading, Vax is charmed by Silas, who says it doesn't hurt to have friends. Percy's second shot fails to block the second pipe, causing the room to slowly fill with acid. Vex drinks her potion of flying that she took from Dr. Ripley, and Grog hits one of the opals, cracking it from the impact. Cassandra steps up to the green glass, putting her hand up to it and calling out, which one is my Percy? Percy steps forward, trying to give her an okay sign and smiling, saying, it's all right, I'll see you soon. But Cassandra replies, your sister left us the day those arrows found my chest. She did not die from those wounds, but to watch you leave me there in the snow, I have a new family. I am a Briarwood, and I have a destiny with the Whispered One. Despite this, though, she does seem conflicted still. Keyleth tries to attempt to reach out to Vax through the earring, but it doesn't work, as the rest of Vox Machina attempt to shatter the gems they'd touched earlier. Grog shatters one stone on the wall, or another stone on the wall, and Scanlan walks into the acid to shatter the stone in the center of the room. Vex fires an exploding arrow and begins to crack one of the glass walls, and seeing the progress made, Grog begins striking at the glass too. Vex flies up to one of the acid pipes after Percy shatters a third gem and attempts to bend it upward, assisted by Keyleth's heat metal spell. Scanlan uses Dimension Door to take himself and Pike outside of the trap in an effort to touch the stone that Cassandra had used earlier, but it seems to have no effect, so Pike attempts to shatter it. Vox Machina successfully finishes destroying all of the gems, but only one of the glass walls rises due to the acid dissolving parts of the ceiling. Keyleth attempts Wall of Stone, but it isn't strong enough to raise the other wall. As they look for options and slowly drown in acid, Pike notices that the white stone wall the Briarwoods left through has actually dissolved from some of the acid, so Scanlan slips underneath the new opening and disables the acid trap, opening the white stone door. But the remainder of Vox Machina is forced to use the endless rope to climb over the glass wall that didn't raise, and that's where they break for the episode. So, what do we think of this first half?
We're getting into my favorite episodes. 33 and 34 are kind of where I really started getting into campaign one. And I think that's where a lot of people start getting into campaign one. But I think I could do an entire episode just about Cassandra in this first half.
Yeah.
Like, she fascinates me. She's got so much going on. And it's incredible bits of storytelling from Matt, but also from Taliesin especially, but the entire crew.
Yeah,
all
I feel
around her.
like, yeah, we don't get a lot of screen time for her as a character overall, especially in the campaign, but particularly in these few episodes. But she is a fascinating character. There is so much depth, and I think Matt has really taken the time to think about dynamics and consequences and capital T trauma.
For sure. And if there's one thing Matt does really well, it's consequences. He's always been good at that in D&D, and he's also got a really good grasp on storytelling. Like, some of the best stories ever written are built on, very generic but very prevalent great fears, great desires. And Cassandra manages to be both in just this episode, much less anything else she does in the campaign. She is, Percy's key to wanting to do more than be a revenge machine. Like, she turns him back into a person, and in the matter of a couple hours turns into his greatest fear of losing her, voluntarily.
Mm,
It's not somebody taking her away from him, it's her walking away, which
mm,
is probably the worst thing you could do to Percy right now. It is by far the most painful thing she could have done. Like, she could have attacked him, he would have just blamed it on possession. This idea of walking away and telling him she's choosing the people who killed his family, that is by far the worst thing she could have done. And
mm.
it just tells such a great story.
I think Matt has expertly encapsulated all of the group's triggers into one
Mhm.
character in Cassandra.
Yes.
Like, I think a lot about the sibling relationships that we are seeing play out in these episodes. And I know Vax and Vex are very suspicious of Cassandra, but I think
Mhm.
they really want to trust her. And they are almost arguing against themselves often in the way that they approach Cassandra and treat Cassandra in this way. And I mean, I think it's the same with Percy. He really wants to trust her. Um, Grog and Pike and Keyleth and Scanlan, I don't know exactly what their relationship is with Cassandra at this point.
Yeah, I think Pike's instinct is to trust,
Mm-hmm.
just because of who she is. I don't think, like, she gets what, 15 minutes with Cassandra before
Yeah.
Cassandra turns.
Yeah.
So I don't think it really counts, but I think Pike would trust. I think Scanlan is skeptical and kind of keeping his distance a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
um, which is fair. And I think Grog is just going to do whatever, whichever gnome is most prevalent is going to do.
Hmm.
So because Scanlan is more present in this episode, he's going to follow Scanlan's lead and be a little bit skeptical about it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think they've got a wide range. Um, but the thing that I think is most interesting is the way that the people with siblings interact with Cassandra versus the way the people who don't have siblings interact with Cassandra. Because the twins are suspicious. They're always suspicious of everybody, but they're still very much into this is a good thing. And, we're gonna roll with it. We're not gonna, you know, make a big deal out of it. We don't really trust you, but we recognize you are, a good thing for Percy. And Pike and Grog are kind of the same way. They're pseudo siblings, but they,
Yeah.
have that kind of relationship.
Yeah.
And they're also on this is probably an okay thing or a good thing, depending on, which one of them we're talking about. But Scanlan and Keyleth, who are, you know, only children for all intents and purposes,
Yeah. As far as we know.
uh, as far as we know anyway, yeah, are the more skeptical ones,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and are less welcoming of this relationship, which is
Mm-hmm.
interesting.
I honestly think that Keyleth really wants Cassandra to be the catalyst for Percy humanizing himself in this.
Interesting.
She just desperately wants him to be humanized in this, right? Like, she's been pushing for that the entire time they've been in Whitestone.
Yeah.
But I think she's mad that Cassandra is the solution that has presented itself.
Interesting. That's a fascinating take for me. Because I think for me it comes across more as Keyleth is unsure how to treat siblings. She
Mm,
doesn't really know how to navigate that relationship because she's never had it.
mm,
So the only real example we know she has is Vex and Vax, who are their own ball of complications.
yeah.
So being presented with a sibling relationship is an unknown entity. And we know she doesn't deal with those well. So I see it more as Keyleth just doesn't really know how to navigate this situation.
Mm. That is fascinating because I think Keyleth almost has a sibling relationship with Percy too
Oh,
up
I
to
agree.
this point,
Yeah.
but I don't think she recognizes it and or knows what to do with it either.
Yeah, I think for us it's easy to categorize as a sibling relationship. I think that's very much what they have. Or it's the closest analogous way we can put it. Um, is a sibling type relationship. But I don't think Keyleth would classify it that way. I don't think Keyleth would understand it that way.
Mhm.
Percy might, but probably not. I don't think either of them would put it in those terms. They might put it as like best friend or confidant or all of these things that they are, but all of the things that they are add up to a sibling relationship.
Mhm.
It's just easier to see for us.
Yeah, I also find Scanlan's actions in this first half super fascinating because I don't know how invested he's been in this whole Whitestone adventure all along the way, and he just seems to be intent on pointing out the facts of the matter and pointing out like the broader scope of what's going on instead of these interpersonal conflicts that the rest of the group is focusing on. Like,
Yeah.
he does say, like, remember, guys, there is an active rebellion going on outside, but then he also says, like, can't we just leave and like bring the evidence to Amon at the same time? And so it seems a bit contradictory on his half, but I don't think he's putting as much weight into the whole family conflict that the rest of the group
Mhm.
is.
Yeah, I think he's a little bit disconnected because he doesn't have that kind of familial relationship with anybody in this system. Like if we look at the pairings we've talked about, we cover everybody but him.
Yeah.
And so he's a little bit, I think, in a different position than everybody else. I think he's also, this is one of the episodes where he's back into his kind of wise mentor stage of being the oldest of the group and just pointing things out to break the tension or to move the conversation out of a circular realm.
Yeah.
Like his whole thing here is just keeping them moving in some direction. He doesn't care which,
Yeah.
as long as they're still moving.
Yeah, because they are spending a lot of time in circular arguments
Mhm.
throughout this whole Whitestone arc. And me personally, I'm frustrated by it when I'm watching these. I'm like, all right, guys, we get it. Trauma. All right, let's, there are bigger things going on here than your interpersonal issues.
Yeah. It's so much easier to focus on the interpersonal issues, but yes, they have other stuff happening.
Hmm.
Yeah. It's really interesting. And I think just to circle back a little bit and look at Cassandra a little bit more, like her decision that is so conflicted to trap them in that room. Like
Hmm.
I am fully convinced she found that eighth opal because she knew it was there. Like she was part of the trap.
Interesting.
Um,
I was watching that very specifically with Matt, and he actually rolled to find the button.
he did, but it could be a role for a lot of things.
Yeah,
It could be a role that didn't need to happen and was just for the player's sake.
yeah,
Like there's a lot of DM tricks that could be that
yeah.
we have like I would be it could be, for her to get over there without triggering anybody's suspicions. It could be a role to get there fast enough that it mattered. It could be a role to time it with everybody else.
Mm.
There's a lot of things it could be.
Do you think
Um,
she's been mind controlled the entire time that she's been with them?
no, I think in 5 years they have the opportunity to let up on that, and they do.
Well, I mean, with them, with the group, with Vox Machina, since Vox.
Oh no, I don't think so because she's been with them for 5 years. I
Mm,
think that 5 years in, they kind of have gotten to the point where they trust her to make decisions they want her to make.
mm,
I would guess that they've been testing her.
mm,
Is she going to give them the information on the rebellions of her own volition?
mm,
No, then maybe they go back to controlling her for a bit. If she's giving it to them on her own, do they really need to? Is that a useful way to spend their power? You
mm.
know, these are limited resources and they're trying to raise a god.
Yeah,
So, you
yeah.
know, I don't think so. I think they've had 5 years to where they don't feel the need to, and that's why we see the conflict when
Hmm.
she traps them.
Yeah. I mean, because if Cassandra is given more free will under the Briarwood's reign, that is a severe oversight on the Briarwood's behalf, right?
Yeah, but would you be surprised? Like they think they are doing the right thing and that people are going to follow them or are going to fear them enough to follow them. Like they're not mind controlling the entire populace, but the populace stays.
Mm,
You know, there's a lot going on here where they have other means of control that aren't just pure mind control, you
mm,
know, and they've had a lot of time to implement them.
mm.
So I don't think they need it, honestly. I think they've given her a lot of leash, and that's why this turns out the way it does. You know,
Interesting. Yeah. Man, I want to see inside Cassandra's head. Like if this was a book,
right?
I would want a chapter from her POV.
I am a little bit obsessed with Cassandra in these first few episodes that she's in. Like I have all kinds of theories, but I want to know what's really there.
Yeah.
But I have lots and lots of theories about Cassandra based on just like the few glimpses she gives of conflict or of her true self. Like that first speech was genuine,
Hmm.
but how much of it is currently accurate and how much of it is carefully worded so that it's the truth from when it was true. Like it may not be anymore.
Yeah, I mean, that's so interesting when we talk about people who have endured long periods of manipulation from other
Mm-hmm.
people, other sources, external sources, is like what they believe to be true, genuinely believe to be true, isn't objectively true often.
Yeah.
Like, I'm thinking about this in terms of like a third campaign character in the party right now is like she doesn't think she's lying and that's her truth. And like that, I think
Mm-hmm.
that brings up the concept of how subjective truth can be. Like what actually constitutes a lie and what actually constitutes the truth at the end of the day.
Right. Especially when you've had so much information fed to you
Hmm.
that, you know, might taint that idea of truth.
Hmm.
You know, it might change it entirely. There's so much that could be different. And it's just Cassandra has so much going on and it impacts the party in some very interesting ways in this episode. And we don't know most of it. Like most of this is left to our imagination and it stays that way.
Hmm.
Like even later on in the campaign, we don't get a whole lot of insight into this period of Cassandra's life.
Yeah.
And it's so much fodder for fascinating stories, fascinating implications, and you know, some big heavy lifting of like what is true and what does manipulation do and how culpable are you for the things you do post manipulation and you know what consequences are there for people who have been subject to all of this. There are so many questions that she brings into this campaign.
And I don't know if there is a right answer. Like, this is
No.
at his finest, bringing so much gray morality into the conversation.
Yeah. And I mean, that's part of why Critical Role thrives, is because they allow the gray to exist.
Mhm.
It's part of their storytelling strategy, is if the gray is there, there's a lot more to play with. There's a lot more interest to it. You know, we see later campaigns, entire parties are gray in their morality, in their situations. Like there is a lot of room to play in the gray areas and they've been doing it from the start and Cassandra is one of those big gray areas that they never really clear up.
Mm,
It's we're not meant to know, was she good, was she bad, was this all her, was it mostly the Briarwoods? We can theorize, they're never going to tell us.
mm.
So that makes her one of the most fun characters to me because we don't know.
Yeah, I was thinking about this as we were talking. I was like, what has Matt said about Cassandra as a character in their like post-campaign talks? And I honestly can't remember anything that he's said.
Yeah, I mean, he said a few things, but I don't think he said anything major.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's one of those like things where she's actually talked about very little.
Hmm.
Um, but it's she's such a fun character. And I think they did make some decisions in like the animated version of
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
that kind of tip it one way or the other. But
Yeah.
looking at the actual source material, it is so nebulous and so gray
Mhm.
and just a complete mystery. And it's interesting that they made those choices moving into the animated series to make it clearer where her allegiances lie.
Yeah. Yeah. She is a character where we can very easily project our own interpretations of the
Hmm.
situation onto her because it is so gray. Like we as viewers want to know which side she stands on, so we project whatever outcome we want from that question. But in
Yeah,
reality, there is no definitive answer there.
yeah, which is kind of the fun part of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, what about personal experiences? Anything coming to mind for us?
I think the thing that for personal experiences came to mind was actually Vax. You know, he jumps out and hits a button that he thinks is going to solve everything. And it's this impulsive decision that just becomes catastrophic to him.
Yeah.
um, and like he couldn't have known, and the best thing to do was to do something.
Yeah.
Um, but it is like there's got to be so much like regret happening there and just what do you do with that? And so I've been thinking a lot about impulse decisions lately. And just
Cool.
like, what choices do I make in the moment that I then like look at the consequences of and go, oh my God, it all traces back to that like 30-second choice and everything sucks because of that 30 seconds. Um, so you know, there's been a couple of examples lately of just like, you know, events that I went to where I made a choice to get in one line versus the other, and I end up in the worst possible spot, or I end up not getting into the event. And, you know, I picked a spot at the very beginning and I could have chosen differently, and it just drastically changes your experience of something. So I don't know. It was a brief connection, but one that felt very relevant in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think I'm thinking more about experiencing narcissists in my life
Mm-hmm.
and how slippery they can be. Because I kind of see Cassandra as one of those characters because narcissists are often birthed from other manipulators and narcissists, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, how much can you hold their actions accountable to them versus the people that created them?
Yeah.
Like, I dated someone once who had a very capital T traumatic childhood. And at the end of the day, I had to make some really interesting just conversations with myself of like, who do I actually blame for his actions?
Mm-hmm.
Because I understand where they're coming from. I understand how he got to those points in his life, to those decisions that he's making, to these behaviors, to these actions.
Mm-hmm.
But what percentage of responsibility rests on him and which percentage of responsibility rests on the people who made him too at the same time?
Right.
And like, I think that's the conversation we're having around Cassandra too, is like, at what point is it them making decisions for themselves or them making decisions based on what they were taught, what they learned, what they saw, what they
Yeah.
experienced?
I think that's a bigger societal question
Oh
and
man, tell
one
me
that
about
is
it. Yeah.
a minefield.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, well, I had to have that conversation with myself about myself too as I was
Right.
growing up. Like, I definitely saw patterns within myself that I adopted from my parents, and they weren't necessarily healthy patterns or beneficial patterns or useful patterns. And
Yeah.
I had to go through a process of being like, oh, okay, that's where they're coming from. And how do I break myself from those habits and
Hmm.
which habits are worth breaking myself from and which ones do I want to keep. And it requires a lot of self-reflection, which a lot of
Yep.
people are not willing to do.
No, but it's so the world would be so much better if people would just actually interrogate their beliefs and
Oh,
practices.
yeah.
This is my habit and my tradition, but why and what impact does it have? And
Yeah.
those are really hard questions to ask yourself.
Yeah.
But oh my gosh, if more people would do it, the world would be so much better.
Yeah. I mean, critical thinking, A, should be taught to everyone, and B, like therapy should be a universal right.
Yeah, the world would be better. Yes.
But yeah, I mean, because I once read a book called Behave by Robert Sapolsky, and if you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend it. It's a real thick 800 pager, and he goes through each chapter is one level of what influences human behavior.
Mhm.
So all the way from global cultural to like biology and hormones and chemicals that are produced in your body, like
Right.
everything in between those two things of like what could possibly go into influencing a human's behavior. And it's a bit overwhelming. I find it fascinating because it's like, all right, are my behaviors actually my own at the end of the day? Or am I just being influenced?
Right. Yeah, it's a hard question to answer. It
Yeah,
really is.
yeah. I'm like, who am I? What am I doing? Why am I doing these things? And cue existential crisis after
Don't we love a show that brings up like the most complicated life questions ever?
Yeah, well, I mean, the key is to become a master of existential crises
There we
so
go.
that you
Yeah.
don't get completely taken out by them. You're like, oh yeah, that was Tuesday. Moving on.
Fair.
Well, what are we gonna do about it?
I think the thing that I wanted to take from this is about that trust of people, and really closely interrogating who you trust implicitly
Hmm.
and why, and just an opportunity to do a little bit of introspection around, especially like friends and coworkers and things like that, where you're in a certain situation which makes you want to trust them because they're in close proximity, but should you?
Mhm.
And due to some recent events in my life, that's become something that I think I need to do for myself and for the people around me, and really take um, stock of some of the people I choose to trust and
Mhm.
what that means.
I love that you bring that up because I was recently confronted with a question from someone about who I want to make a decision if I'm on life support and cannot make my own
Hmm.
decisions. And I was like, hold on, my brain is hurting. It's like, wait a minute. I was like, do I want to put someone like, I think it's called a directive that you set for yourself is like, do I want someone who's going to keep me on life support as long as possible in the hopes that I may recover at some point?
Hmm.
Or do I want someone who is going to pull the plug and, call it when it seems like they should call it?
Yeah.
And that's one step of the equation. And then the other step is who would I actually trust to make that decision about me? And I was just like, I am not ready to answer these questions.
Yeah, that was something that I, I was asked to consider a couple years ago when I was doing like a power of attorney and things for reasons.
Yeah.
And oh, that was a lot of very hard questions in a very short amount of time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's honestly the question between pessimism and optimism at the end of the day, too.
Yeah, it tells you a lot about yourself.
Yeah. I'm like, I want a realist, but I don't know any realists.
Fair. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I have gotten to the point where I understand more or less where people's behaviors are coming from. I understand motivations very well after years and years and years and years and years of therapy and self-reflection and studying the human psyche. I more or less understand why people do the things that they do. But that doesn't also help me make decisions.
Yeah, it's easier to live with when you understand. It doesn't help with the actual decision making.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know if I have an answer to this question right now. I don't really have much answers right now, but I'm going to think about it, I guess.
That's an action item, you know. Take some time to think about it. Sure.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's one of those big questions that I just have to let simmer on the back burner for a while until it somehow works itself out. I don't think logical, focused thinking is actually going to accomplish much in this.
No, it's just having the idea in your brain. And like that in itself is one of the values of this show is it makes you consider the larger bits. So I think that's a perfectly valid takeaway from this of this is a thing I need to consider. And it was, brought up because of a fake D&D show,
Oh,
but that
critical.
doesn't make it less important.
It's so funny when I try to explain my obsession with Critical Role to people who don't even
Mhm.
really know what D&D is in the first place. I'm like, there's so many layers of explanation that I have to go through in order to get even close to why this show means so much to me. And I honestly don't believe that most of the people that I talk to are even in the right mental state to understand the first three levels, let alone the next six.
Fair, I would agree.
I'm like, I just like it. Let's just leave it at that.
Yeah, yeah, I've definitely come up with simplified versions for people who are not in the Critterverse.
Yeah, yeah. Oh man, the powerful things we learn. Well, anything you want to add before we wrap up?
I don't think so. I mean, I could keep going, but let's not.
Well, we'll have more time to talk about Cassandra in the following episode.
Oh, for sure.
Like,
He
I
sticks around for a bit.
I was almost going to talk about how Vox Machina treats her after this
Hmm.
Briarwood arc, and I was like, we've got time to get to that. I was like,
We'll talk about that when we get there.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is powerful stuff that we're talking about. An audience, we definitely encourage you to share your own thoughts and feelings and insights with us as well. We'd love to know how Critical Role has impacted you in your own lives. Do you have to weirdly explain your love of Critical Role to other people? You are in the right place. Special thanks to Alice for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Always happy to be here.
So next time we'll be discussing Campaign 1, Episode 34, Part 2, and joining me again will be Atlas, so I'm super excited for that. As always, I'm looking for more co-hosts and guests, so if you're interested, please reach out, let me know. In the meantime, please comment, like, subscribe below, follow us on Tumblr at Sacred Reading CR, and until next time, may all beings be peaceful, may all beings be free, and be the chaotic good you wish to see in the world. Take care, guys.
Bye.